July 2552, and the UNSC has just won a victory at the Battle of Sigma Octantis IV. However, during that engagement, the Covenant discovered the location of a key human settlement, the planet of Reach. Now unknown to humanity, a Covenant assault force is being prepared to assault this human fortress. At the beginning of the battle, the objectives of UNSC forces would be to simply repel the Covenant assault, but by the end of the engagement, the objective became more about evacuating civilians and trying to reduce civilian casualties. Meanwhile, the Covenant sought to overrun the human stronghold of Reach, seize any Forerunner artifacts on the planet, and wipe out the civilian population. The fighting on Reach began on July 23, 2552, when Covenant scouting forces carried out an assault against the Visegrad Relay. The objectives of this assault were to cut off UNSC communications. While UNSC forces initially assumed that this assault was carried out by insurrectionists, a counterstrike carried out by Noble Team quickly figured out that this was actually a Covenant assault. However, by that time, Covenant strike forces had moved on to engage the UNSC defenses around the Oni facility Sword Base. This assault on Sword Base was ultimately repelled on July 26th, with Sword Base falling back into UNSC hands, and the Forerunner artifact buried beneath that Oni site secured. The fighting would remain relatively quiet until August 11th, when UNSC scouting forces discovered a massive Covenant staging area being set up on the Vieri continent. The following day, on August 12th, 2552, UNSC forces launched a full-scale assault against the amassing Covenant force known as the Battle of Vieri. During this engagement, Covenant forces were eventually pushed back far enough for UNSC troops to assault and disable several of the shield and jamming facilities designed to protect the Covenant staging area. However, following this assault, it was quickly revealed that a massive Covenant supercarrier had positioned itself in orbit and had been shuttling troops down to the surface. The UNSC objectives quickly became to destroy the Long Night of Solace, this supercarrier. With the cat now out of the bag that a massive Covenant invasion force was on Reach, the Covenant began launching strikes against anything within range. This included UNSC military facilities and major population centers all across the Vieri continent. This included the Saber launch facility at Farkas Lake, where the forces of Noble Team would ultimately have to fight through Covenant forces to make their way to the Saber strike fighters and make their way to orbit. Once in orbit, UNSC forces were eventually able to destroy the Long Night of Solace, but the destruction of the supercarrier would usher the arrival of a much larger Covenant fleet, which would quickly overwhelm UNSC forces in orbit and allow a larger Covenant invasion force to arrive on the planet of Reach. With the arrival of this much larger Covenant force, on August 18th, Brute-led troops began besieging major UNSC civilian centers across Reach, including cities like New Alexandria. It's around this time that the objectives of the UNSC forces shifted from repelling the Covenant invasion to evacuating as many civilians as possible. Meanwhile, the situation in orbit looked increasingly dire, with UNSC naval forces being scattered and their rendezvous being cut off by the arrival of yet more Covenant ships. By August 23rd, major evacuations were underway in every major population center across Reach, many of these evacuations having to be carried out under fire as Covenant troops bore down on major UNSC cities. By the night on the 23rd, the glassing of Reach had begun, with Covenant bombardments beginning on the Vieri continent and initially beginning with those major population centers like New Alexandria. By August 26th, most of the UNSC population on Reach had either been evacuated by UNSC forces or wiped out in Covenant glassing attacks, as many of the major population centers by this point were completely gone. It's around this time that UNSC forces in orbit were able to muster and prepare for a counter-assault against the Covenant naval forces, but before they could carry out their counter-assault, another large Covenant fleet arrived in orbit over the system, this fleet consisting of over 300 ships. This resulted in a major naval engagement above Reach that would end in a human defeat, with the UNSC naval forces scattered once again all around the Epsilon Eridani system. One vessel involved in this engagement was the UNSC Pillar of Autumn, which initially intended to flee from the system following the defeat in orbit, but was recalled back to Reach by Dr. Catherine Halsey, who was operating out of Sword Base, which at this point had fallen under Covenant control. On the 29th, Noble Team moved in to Sword Base to briefly liberate the facility from Covenant troops and extract an AI construct created by Halsey. They then proceeded to deliver it to the Azad shipyard the following day, August 30th, where it could be loaded onto the Pillar of Autumn, which had landed at said shipyard, and evacuated off the planet. By this point, major glassing campaigns were taking place all across Reach, and the end was near. With UNSC forces in orbit scattered and disjointed, the Pillar of Autumn jumped to slip space and away from the Epsilon Eridani system, where the last defenders of Reach fell to the onslaught of Covenant troops and the advancing glassing beams. At the end of the day, the Battle of Reach is often viewed as a human tragedy. The loss of not only a military stronghold, but a major population center and a hub for commerce and leadership for the UNSC. Well, it will be overshadowed in the following weeks by the Battle of Earth. At the time, the fall of Reach was shocking to the UNSC population, especially since they had won a battle the previous month, a relatively rare occurrence, against a Covenant strike force above Sigma Octantis 4. If you'd like to learn about the Battle of Sigma Octantis 4, I'll leave a link in the upper right-hand corner to my battle analysis on that. And if you have any other engagements you'd like to see covered in future episodes of Battle Analysis and added to the archive, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.